Welcome to Doctors Unbound, your show devoted to doctors who are, well, unbound by physician stereotypes. Get a behind-the-scenes look at doctors that are breaking the mold and breaking into the worlds of technology, writing, investing, politics, just to name a few. This is Doctors Unbound, where you'll hear from experts with the insights to help you go to the next level. Let's get this show started. Here is your host, Dr. Dave Draginas.
Welcome to another episode of Doctors Unbound. I hope you are having an awesome day. Here's what I've been pondering this last week or so. Are you changing the world around you, or is it changing you? One more time. Are you changing the world around you, or is it changing you? Anyways, love to hear your thoughts on that. One more quick reminder. You can still purchase White Coat Investors' financial course. You can go to drsunbound.com, click on the resources tab, and then after signing up, shoot me a quick email and you'll get your free 20-minute coaching call. So if you at all are interested in learning about financial topics, definitely check out White Coat Investors' awesome course. Okay, that's all that I got for you. Let's get going on with the show. Welcome to another episode of the Doctors Unbound podcast. I've got a special guest with us today. He is a physician. He's been a leader among medical societies, and he is now serving in the Texas legislature. Dr. Zerwas, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you very much.
Absolutely. One question that we get into here as we get to know our guests is the question of morning routines. I imagine your schedule might be kind of hectic now, working in politics. I'm not sure if you still practice medicine, but is there a morning routine that you keep to?
Well, there is, and thank you for that question. It's I'm up early, as my career in anesthesiology has sort of required us to be.
Right.
And some days I am going into the operating room and doing cases at one of the hospitals that our practice supports. Other days I have meetings in my district that require me to be, pretty much out and about in the area that I live, and so we scheduled that. But as a morning routine, I typically am up early, between 4:30 and 5 in the morning. If I'm not driving to my clinical work, which is 2 or 3 days a week, I'm reviewing some of the news articles and things that have come out that morning, and just sort of getting a gauge on what's going on politically as well as otherwise.
Very cool. Now, I've been in Texas a little over 6, almost 7 years now, and when I moved here, I discovered that Texas has some great steakhouses. Is there a favorite food and drink that you enjoy?
Well, as far as foods, I'm really pretty open. There's not too many things I don't like. The wonderful restaurant in my district called Anthony's, it's actually out in Simonton, and it's almost the only thing that's out there. But it's run and owned by a really nationally renowned chef. He used to be a chef for the President Bush and others and stuff. So that typically is where I go. I haven't found anything on his menu I don't like.
Well, that sounds pretty cool. I'm gonna have to check it out whenever I'm in your neck of the woods. That's very cool. It sounds like you're very busy, but when you're not working, is there a hobby that you enjoy doing?
Yeah, right now I'm at a phase of my life where I enjoy grandchildren, and I don't mean to call them a hobby, but they certainly consume my discretionary time. And I'm very fortunate that at least 4 of the 7 grandchildren that Sylvia and I have live very close. I would say, in fact, that at this very moment, one of my sons and his wife and young family got flooded out completely in the flood of Hurricane Harvey. And so they have, moved in with us and have been so since, October of last year. And it's such a blessing because one of them is a 2-year-old little girl, and they just had a newborn. She's just a little over 2 months old right now. And so I get to enjoy that every day. And I also get to enjoy the fact that I don't have to raise them, that parents do.
But I think it's great for the whole family because I'm experiencing that on the parent side. I've got a 4-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a 1-year-old, and my parents live in California, but my in-laws are here, very close to us in Frisco, Texas, and it's such a huge benefit to have that extra pair of hands that you can trust, and it's also good for the kids just to have the family dynamic, to have grandma and grandpa around. I think it just benefits everybody all around.
There's no doubt, and I a few years back had my parents actually living with us. They were in their senior years and somewhat declining, and the situation came as they really needed somebody to be around them, and we chose to let them come into our home, and they finished the last couple of years of their life here with us, ultimately passing to terminal conditions related to different cancers. And but it was an incredibly just blessed event, for us, because one, we had the opportunity to give back, but it wasn't so much that. It was just the opportunity to get to be part of your parents' life and them ours. That is something that's hard to describe and count how many blessings came out of that.
I can imagine that. We'll move on a little bit here in the discussion, and I noticed that before you were working in Texas politics, obviously you were a physician. So could you tell us a little bit, maybe just some highlights of your medical career, leading up to your work in politics?
Sure. When I finished my residency in San Antonio, we decided to move back to the area that my now late wife and I grew up in, and raise our family in the general area that we were in. And so we chose Fort Bend County and joined a private practice that sort of met what some of the expectations and needs that we had. I very early got thrust into a leadership role in that practice, and found myself, pursuing roles both within the medical practice as well as in organized medicine, primarily the specialty of anesthesiology. Mm-hmm. And I just sort of fortuitously had some mentors that came my way very early in my private practice clinical career, and made me aware of how important it was to be involved in activities that were outside our typical clinical venue. And from that, I really just developed a very clear understanding and respect for how much we need to do as physicians outside of our day in and day out clinical role.
Right.
Mine ultimately led to, serving in the president of our state and national societies over time. And then at some point in my life, the opportunity to run for public office arose, and after getting the green light from all those that were incredibly important in that regard, we ran, amongst 6 others in our first primary in 2006. And we're fortunate enough to bring it home, and have served in that role ever since that time.
Well, that's fantastic, and your answer kind of segued into the second question I had, which was related to medical leadership, and with all the all of the leadership experience that you've had in the past. Any advice, maybe to those who are earlier on in their career, how they get involved, how they get active in medical leadership type roles?
Absolutely. First and foremost, it's a very simple thing. Just show up.
Uh-huh.
The opportunities are enormous, and these organizations, whether inside your medical staff or outside your medical staff, are really starving for people, physicians, to step up and help address what are truly complex issues related to the delivery of healthcare. I oftentimes speak to young medical students. Just to talk to them a little bit about the legislative process and how things work. And one of the things I always leave them with is that it's no longer an option, or a hobby or something that's just a good citizenship thing to do. It's an absolute requirement for us to step up and be involved in organizations that are looking out for the health of our patients through the strong practice of medicine. And it's one of those things that kind of got inculcated in me early in my private practice, not so much in my residency at that time or even in medical school. But that was over 3 decades ago, so times do change. And the requirement, I think, that we be involved is enormous. So one, it's a calling. You're being called to do it. The door is open to do it. Walk through it, be involved, and identify mentors who have been through this before, who are really looking for people to follow in their footsteps. And I would say for me, that was probably the most important thing that led me down the pathway that I have is just a few mentors who, were there for me for several years in my practice that were constantly encouraging me, teaching me things about, perhaps the political process, both in organized medicine and otherwise, to be successful in those settings. And so I attribute it to others, to my family, and people that just said, look, you need to do this. You have the skill set to do this. Go do it.
Couldn't agree with you more there. And I see this coming up again in my podcast among people that have excelled, physicians that have excelled in various areas is finding mentors who can help them achieve specifically, the areas of interest that they have. So I think that's huge. That's key. And like you said, there's a huge need. We need people who show up and who have the energy to move the specialties forward. I think that's awesome. You serve as chairman of the House Appropriations Committee, and there may be, some doctors out there very busy, don't quite understand exactly, what that means, what that committee does. Maybe can you share with us a little bit about the work that's done in that body?
Absolutely. The House Appropriations Committee is probably the single most important and most powerful committee in the state's Texas House of Representatives. It is equivalent to the Senate Finance Committee on the other side of the Capitol building. And it is charged with doing one thing, and that is developing and ultimately passing a budget for the state of Texas. And it's the only bill that we are constitutionally mandated to do. Every other bill, of which there are thousands each legislative session, are not bills that are required. We do have a variety of sunset bills and things like that are enormously important for the continuation of certain, boards, such as the medical board this last legislative session that got caught up in a political tangle. But truly the only bill that really matters in terms of getting it passed and has such a broad impact on the state of Texas is the General Appropriations Act, or the GAA. And this committee on the House side is the committee that is charged with developing that budget, passing it out of the House, conferencing it with the Senate, bringing it back to the House and the Senate each, and agreeing to accept the conferenced report, and then getting it on the governor's desk for his signature.
Got it. Well, thank you for explaining that. I have a better understanding of it myself now. And it sounds like a lot of work that needs to be done in that committee.
It is. It's a lot of work, but it's work that people, at least it's the largest committee in the House, 27 members, as opposed to the typical committee, which is 9, 11 members or so. So it's a very good spectrum of both Republicans and Democrats, which it needs to be. But it's highly complex, and it is something that touches everything that the state of Texas does. So for those members that do sit on the Appropriations Committee, they get a taste of everything that the state of Texas is involved in, from education and healthcare to criminal justice to transportation, just everything you can think of, because everything we do in Texas has a price tag on it.
Sure. And
therefore it has to be considered as part of the General Appropriations Act.
Gotcha. What are some of the big issues that you've got on your plate working on this year? Well,
of course, we've passed the budget, and we're in the interim now. Texas is doing several other year in a general lawmaking session. Sometimes we can meet in a special session at the call of the governor. So we're in the interim now. It's a period of time where people are running campaigns and getting elected. As an appropriations committee chairman, the single most important thing that we are focused on right now is the impact of Hurricane Harvey in the Gulf Coast region. There is obviously a significant price tag on that will have to be addressed at some point. And it's one that our committee is focused on having regional hearings. In other words, we're actually going out to different parts of the region and conducting hearings and hearing from local elected officials and then getting updates from statewide officials as to where are we on this road to recovery, or as the governor likes to say, this road to rebuild the state of Texas along the Gulf Coast region. And again, this all comes with a significant price tag. It's complicated because of what the federal government is mandated or required to do, and whether the federal government moves fast or slow in certain things. So we are having very, very in-depth hearings to gain an understanding of what the impact is to the region and what ultimately is the price tag to basically help us rebuild Texas.
Well, that's such important work. I mean, so many people were affected by it. Not only did we see it on TV and video, I spoke to a physician that was in Houston, and I got to interview him on the podcast, and he was talking about what he and his family went through experiencing such a devastating natural disaster. So thank you for the work on that. Any advice for doctors who are considering maybe a transition into politics? Yeah,
there probably is a lot. I would say this, and again, these are kind of my own personal thoughts and ideas. Is one, you've been given the incredible opportunity and privilege to practice medicine. Don't necessarily surrender that identity or that practice, if you will, or to stay somehow connected to the practice of medicine. In the state of Texas, it's a little bit easier because they don't pay us to be legislators. Essentially, $600 a month is the salary that a legislator gets, including the lieutenant governor and the speaker.
Wow.
Beyond that, statewide commissioners and the governor, they do pay some money, But for people in the role like I'm in, which is an incredibly busy role from a legislative perspective, I don't get paid any extra money for that. I'll get a stipend to cover costs when I'm in Austin and otherwise, But I need to stay connected to the practice of medicine. If for no other reason, that's how I earn my livelihood and pay the bills, as you might say. But even if you sort of have that opportunity to enter in the political world, at the state level, until you get to some of the highest levels, you really do need to stay connected to your profession because it is ultimately the way you make a livelihood. And from a just a political and legislative point of view, I like the idea that number one, we're not creating career politicians at the state level.
Right.
And our politicians are people that have to go back and live with the decisions and the votes that we've taken. I think that's a very powerful thing. And I think that's the way our founding fathers, both at a state and national level, had envisioned this.
Everybody had skin in the game.
Everybody had skin in the game. And like for when we talk about property taxes to people, which is a very hot item in my district and across the state of Texas, I live with that burden also, know, and so I can feel it, I can taste it, and I'm incredibly motivated to deal with it, not just as an advocate for my constituents, but as from a personal property owner situation.
Very good. And we'll kind of transition here to the last part of the interview. Is there one thing or one action that you want listeners to take after listening to today's podcast?
Yeah, I think it's something that I said earlier, in that it's no longer an option or something quote unquote good to do in terms of being involved in advocacy, whether it's at your city and county level, whether it's at a state level or whether it's at a national level, we have to have members engaged. Not every member will rise to the level of leadership in these organizations, nor should they. But everybody, from a physician's point of view, can step up and support their professional organizations because they have an incredibly strong voice in Austin and I believe in Washington, D.C. That's something that I try to really stress to people that is different from perhaps when I went into practice now 3 decades later, I would say, it's no longer just a good thing to do and a great way to network with fellow physicians. It's an absolute requirement if we're going to protect our patients, good health through the good practice of medicine. We need to be sure that is protected at the state level, which ultimately defines the practice of medicine.
Well, I absolutely agree with you there. And, the only thing that I'll add to that is, I think our physicians and healthcare professionals listening out there should support physicians that are in that fight already. So I'll definitely link up to your campaign and your website. And I think regardless of political party, we need more physicians out there. I think physicians generally are caring, hardworking people who want to see, our nation succeed. So I think it's really important to support physicians that are in those political leadership roles.
Absolutely, and there are so many healthcare issues that the state does need to weigh in on, and it absolutely needs the voice of the physician involved in that, whether it be through your professional organization or whether it be through actually sitting in the legislature like I am. It's incredibly important that your voice be heard, because if it's not, the legislature is going to come to some conclusion or some way to resolve a healthcare-related issue. And if we don't have that input, we are not going to be able to come up with the best policy position.
For sure. Looking back, you've had a long, illustrious career. Is there anything in your career maybe that you wish you'd done differently?
Well, there probably is. At any given moment, I might have said, maybe I would have gotten engaged a little bit earlier in my career. For instance, when I was a medical student or when I was a resident, to perhaps get jumped in there a little bit earlier. I will say I got fast-tracked once I got out into private practice as a consequence of people that took me under their wing and kind of showed me the importance of all of this. I would say, as you get involved in these things, don't let yourself get absorbed to the extent that your family suffers or your profession suffers personally as a consequence. Always keep those things foremost. I was fortunate. I entered into the political world after my children were grown, and so I had less of that child rearing burden that a lot of members have. But I do encourage them to, anytime they have a chance, spend time with your family. You won't get necessarily another chance to do certain things. And there's always those of us in the legislature that can, cover for you and basically handle anything that you might be handling. I will tell you this is just a personal story. In 2013, I had just some devastating losses in my personal life. I mentioned to you my parents were living with us in April and May of 2012. They both passed within 30 days of each other.
Oh wow!
Which was anticipated, but was still
hard.
A loss. Yeah, during that time, my late wife had actually become diagnosed with glioblastoma, which is a deadly disease. And so we lost her about a year later.
Oh my goodness!
This occurring while we were in the legislature. I was president of the American Society of Anesthesiologists at that time. What I will say is that were it not for those many friendships and relationships that we developed out of being involved in the legislature and professional organizations, it would have been a much harder, thing to deal with. And what I had was basically a huge network of friends and contacts who reached out to us, who prayed for us. And I will say to this day, now several years later, that's what got us through that was those friendships and great relationships that we developed out of being involved in that. And that's probably the great dividend of being involved at the level that I've been involved in is that I have just developed an innumerable number of friendships and relationships that I've enjoyed in the best of times, and I have leaned on very hard in the worst of times.
Well, thank you for sharing that story. Sometimes as physicians, we don't realize that, all of these issues of life can affect us too. And just like you said, we need those relationships, those connections to help us through difficult times as well.
Absolutely.
Typically I'll end the podcast with kind of a whimsical question. You're a very busy man, but if there were no commitments of time and infinite resources, any place that you would particularly want to travel to go visit?
Oh, wow. That's great. I've had the opportunity to go and travel quite a bit. I would say there's probably any number of places that I would choose to go to. I would say the most important one for me right now would be to be near my children and grandchildren, which I'm blessed to be. So any place or anything I would do would be, would always be second to that,
Right.
But that second place that I would probably go to, just because I just love that area, is the island of Mykonos in the Greek islands.
Okay.
And just a place that I would go and hang out for like a month, just because I just enjoy sort of the laid back environment there, and family could come and go during that 1 month. And then when I come home to what's really the best place for me to be, which is right here with my children and grandchildren, and get to be a relevant part of their life.
Well, it sounds like a great place to relax a little bit and decompress before getting back to family and work.
Absolutely.
Where can people reach you? If they want to support the campaign, is there a particular website or way for them to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. JohnZerwas.com, which is a sort of a typical one for those of us in politics, but that gives you a pretty good lay of the land as far as issues that I'm sort of expected to address in my district and on a statewide basis. And opportunities to support us in any number of ways exist there. So JohnZerwas.com is a good place to start.
Perfect, and we'll definitely link up to that in the show notes on the site. Is there anything that we didn't cover maybe that you wanted to mention before we go?
Not really. I think you've given me the opportunity to sort of really address those things that I think are important for people that are pursuing leadership. I think it's just an incredibly important thing that physicians look to how they can be involved in leadership activities. And there's lots of resources out there to help them kind of get to the next level if they want to.
Well, thank you so much for a great interview. I want to thank you for the work that you're doing on behalf of the state of Texas, and also for taking the time to coming on this podcast. There's a lot of doctors that listen and other healthcare professionals, and I really appreciate the insights and advice that you've delivered to us today.
Well, thank you, Doctor, and thank you for your extra effort to participate in something like this. We all benefit greatly from that.
Awesome. Well, we'll sign off right now, and thanks again.
Thank you for listening to Doctors Unbound podcast. Remember to head over to doctorsunbound.com to access all the show notes and resources discussed in this episode. Now, it's your turn to be unbound.